She didn't remember the exact moment she stopped loving him, but she remembered with unbearable clarity the moment she realized he had stopped needing her. New York never truly went quiet. Even at 2 a.m., there was always something, sirens folding into the distance, a subway rattling beneath concrete, the low hum of a city refusing to sleep. Inside their apartment, though, there was silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that felt like something had already ended, but neither of them had said it out loud yet. Elena stood by the window, her reflection faint against the glass. Below, the city shimmered, alive, restless, full of motion. Everything she felt, she wasn't. Behind her, Julian sat at the dining table, a soft lamp casting a pool of light over blueprints spread neatly in front of him. His posture was unchanged from hours ago. Focused, still, contained. He hadn't asked her where she'd been. Not when she came in an hour late. Not when she set her keys down a little too carefully. Not even when she avoided looking at him. "You're still working?" she asked, finally, her voice cutting gently through the silence. Julian didn't look up immediately. He finished the line he was drawing, set the pencil down, then lifted his gaze. Yeah, that was it. Just one word. No curiosity, no tension, no accusation. And somehow that unsettled her more than anything else. Elena turned back to the window. "You should take a break." "I will." Another short answer. She exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the glass. It was cold. There had been a time when silence between them felt different, comfortable, even intimate. They used to sit like this, doing separate things, yet somehow connected. She used to feel seen without needing to be looked at. Now she felt invisible, or worse, irrelevant. "You didn't ask," she said before she could stop herself. Julian tilted his head slightly. "Ask where I was." A pause. Not long, but long enough. "I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." There was no edge in his voice. No suspicion. No passive aggression. Just space. And Elena hated it, because it meant he wasn't chasing her anymore, wasn't trying to hold on to something slipping. "Do you care?" she pressed, turning to face him now. Julian met her eyes, steady and unreadable. "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, but it didn't feel the way she expected. "Then why don't you act like it?" Another pause. This one heavier. Julian leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her. Not with frustration, not with anger, but with something quieter. Something that made her feel like she was being understood in a way she didn't fully want. "I'm not sure what you want me to do," he said. Elena let out a small, humorless laugh. "I don't know. Maybe ask questions. Be curious. Care enough to notice something's off." "I noticed." That stopped her. "What I noticed, you've been coming home later. That you check your phone more. That you don't really talk about your day anymore." His tone remained even, measured, controlled, and she challenged. "And I thought you'd tell me when you were ready." There it was again. That space, that refusal to force something. And suddenly Elena felt something twist inside her chest, sharp, uncomfortable. "Not everything is that simple, Julian." "I didn't say it was." "Then say something else." She didn't even know what she wanted him to say. Accuse her, question her, demand something. Anything but this calm detachment that made her feel like she was already gone from his life and he had just accepted it. Julian looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly, "Are you unhappy?" The question landed differently than she expected. Not defensive, not confrontational, just direct. Elena hesitated, because the truth wasn't simple. "I don't know," she admitted. And that was the first honest thing she had said in weeks. Julian nodded slowly, as if that answer made sense to him. He didn't push further, didn't ask why, didn't try to fix it. And that more than anything felt like distance. Because Marcus would have said something. Marcus would have leaned in, asked more, made her feel like the center of the moment. Marcus would have noticed the way. She paused before answering. Julian just accepted it. And in that acceptance, Elena began to rewrite the story in her mind. Maybe this wasn't love anymore. Maybe it had never been the kind she needed. Behind his calm exterior, Julian picked up his pencil again, but his eyes didn't return to the blueprint right away. They lingered just for a second on Elena. Not with confusion, not with fear, but with a quiet understanding. He didn't speak aloud. Something had already shifted, and he knew it. He just wasn't going to stop it. The first time Elena noticed Marcus Hale, it wasn't because of what he said. It was because of how the room shifted around him. The rooftop bar in Soho buzzed with curated energy, media executives, startup founders, influencers, orbiting one another in carefully constructed conversations. Elena had been to dozens of these events. She knew the choreography, eye contact that lasted just long enough, laughter that sounded effortless, interest that could be withdrawn just as quickly. She was good at it. Or at least she had been. Tonight, though, she felt off. Like she was performing a version of herself that no longer fit quite right. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else. The voice came from her left, low, confident, edged with amusement. Elena turned. Marcus Hale didn't wait for permission to be noticed. Tall, sharply dressed, his presence carried that effortless authority that wasn't loud but didn't need to be. His gaze rested on her like he had already decided she was worth his attention. And more dangerously, like he expected her to know it. I could say the same about you, Elena replied instinctively, matching his tone. He smiled just slightly. I don't go places I don't want to be. Something about that landed. Not because it was clever, but because it sounded intentional. And yet you're here, she said. Because I saw you walk in, it should have felt rehearsed, predictable. But it didn't. Because Marcus didn't deliver the line like he was trying to impress her. He said it like it was already obvious. Elena felt it, a subtle shift inside her. Not quite excitement, not yet. Recognition of something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. You don't even know me, she said. I know enough, Marcus replied. His eyes moved briefly, not in a way that objectified, but in a way that assessed. You're not here to network. You're here because you think you should be. Elena blinked. That was uncomfortably accurate. And what makes you so sure, she asked. He shrugged, taking a slow sip of his drink. Because I've seen people who want something. You don't look like you do. There was no judgment in his voice, just observation. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, Elena felt seen in a way that was sharper, more immediate than anything she'd felt in months. Julian saw her too, but differently, gently, quietly, without urgency. Marcus saw her like she was something to be figured out, something worth focusing on. That's a bold assumption, she said, though her voice softened just slightly. Is it wrong? Elena hesitated. And that hesitation told him everything. Marcus didn't press. He didn't need to. Instead, he shifted the conversation, asked about her work, her recent campaigns, her perspective on a brand launch she had casually mentioned. Not surface-level curiosity, but precise questions. The kind that required listening. The kind that made her feel interesting, important. By the time their conversation drifted into its second hour, Elena realized something unsettling. She hadn't checked her phone once. Not for emails, not for notifications, not even out of habit. And when Marcus laughed, really laughed, not the polite version people used in rooms like this, she felt something loosen in her chest. You're different when you talk about things you actually care about, he said at one point. Elena raised an eyebrow. Different how? Less restrained. The word lingered. Restrained. She thought about that on the ride home. About how Julian never used words like that. He didn't label her, didn't analyze her. He accepted her as she was. And suddenly that felt like something else. Like maybe he wasn't paying enough attention to see the difference. The apartment was dim when she walked in. Julian was on the couch this time, a book resting open in his hands. The lamp beside him cast a soft glow across the room. He looked up as she entered. Hey. Just that. No questions. No shift in tone. no indication that her absence had registered beyond the surface. Hey, she replied, slipping off her heels. A pause. She waited. For something. Anything. How was it? Julian asked after a moment. The question was there, technically, but it felt delayed, like an afterthought. It was fine, she said. Julian nodded. That's good. And then he returned to his book. Elena stood there for a second longer than necessary, watching him, waiting. He didn't look up again, didn't ask who she talked to, didn't notice that her energy was different, that something had shifted. And just like that, the comparison began. Marcus would have asked more. Marcus would have noticed. Marcus would have. She stopped herself. It wasn't fair. Julian had always been this way. Steady, respectful, non-intrusive. That was what she used to love about him. So why did it suddenly feel like distance? Later that night, lying in bed beside him, Elena stared at the ceiling. Julian's breathing was even slow. He had fallen asleep quickly, like he always did. She turned slightly, studying his profile in the dark. There was nothing lacking about him, nothing objectively wrong. And yet something inside her had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way she could clearly define, but enough to create a question where there hadn't been one before. Is this enough? The thought came quietly, dangerously, and instead of rejecting it, she let it linger. Because earlier that night, for a brief, undeniable moment, she hadn't felt invisible. She had felt chosen. And now, lying in the dark next to a man who loved her without condition, she began to wonder if that was the same thing. The changes didn't arrive like a storm. They arrived like a shift in air pressure, subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, until breathing itself felt different. Julian noticed it in fragments. Not in what Elena said, but in what she stopped saying. She no longer lingered in the kitchen while he made coffee in the mornings. Conversations that used to stretch about nothing, about everything, now ended in shorter sentences, cleaner exits. She still smiled, still functioned within the rhythm of their life, but something essential had been withdrawn. Not dramatically, deliberately. Like a tide receding without announcement. Julian didn't ask about it. Not because he didn't see it, but because he did. And asking wouldn't change what was already in motion. One evening, Elena sat across from him at dinner, her phone resting beside her plate. It buzzed once. She didn't pick it up immediately, but her eyes flickered toward it just for a second. That was enough. Julian noticed. He cut his steak slowly, methodically. You can check it, he said, without looking up. Elena glanced at him. It's nothing important. A beat. Then she flipped the phone over. Face down. But her attention had already shifted. Julian nodded slightly as if confirming something to himself. Okay. He didn't ask who it was. Didn't ask why her shoulders had tensed before she answered. Didn't ask why she hadn't simply ignored it the way she used to. The silence stretched. Elena chewed slowly, aware of it now. Too aware. You've been quiet lately, she said, placing her fork down. Julian looked up. I've always been quiet. That's not what I mean. Another pause. He leaned back slightly, his gaze steady but unreadable. What do you mean? She hesitated. Because the truth wasn't clear, not even to her. I don't know. You just feel distant. The word hung between them. Julian considered it. Then calmly I could say the same. Elena frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means you're here, he said, gesturing lightly toward her, but not really. The statement wasn't sharp. It wasn't accusatory, but it landed with more weight than if it had been. Elena felt a flicker of irritation, because he wasn't supposed to see it that clearly. And what am I supposed to do with that? She asked. Julian shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible movement. That's up to you. There it was again. That space. That refusal to define, to chase, to demand. It didn't feel like patience anymore. It felt like detachment, like he was already preparing for something he hadn't said out loud. And instead of pulling her closer, it pushed her further away. Do you even care enough to try, Elena? Asked her voice tightening slightly. Julian met her eyes. I am trying. How by not forcing you, he thought. By not turning this into something you'll deny, just to protect yourself. By giving you space to choose honestly, even if that choice isn't me. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he answered simply, by being here. Elena let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. That's not enough, Julian. He didn't react, didn't defend himself, didn't argue. And that more than anything felt like confirmation of what she had already begun to believe. That he lacked something Marcus didn't. Later that night, Elena stood in the bathroom, her phone in her hand. A message glowed on the screen. Marcus, you disappeared early. I was starting to think you regretted talking to me. Her thumb hovered for a second before she replied. Elena, I don't regret it. The response came almost immediately. Marcus, good. I'd hate to be forgettable. A small smile tugged at her lips. Not because of the words, but because of the attention behind them. The immediacy. The intention. Across the apartment, Julian sat alone in the living room. The book he had opened lay untouched in his lap. His eyes weren't on the page. They were fixed somewhere else, somewhere quieter. He replayed the evening in his mind. Not the words, the gaps between them. The way Elena's attention fractured. The way her presence felt conditional. And beneath it all, something settled inside him. Not anger, not even sadness. Clarity. It wasn't a sudden realization. It was something that had been forming quietly, now taking shape. She was already leaving. Maybe not physically, not yet. But emotionally, decisively, she had stepped somewhere else. Julian exhaled, slowly closing the book. He didn't confront her. Didn't demand answers. Because there was a difference between not knowing and knowing without needing confirmation. And Julian knew. The next morning, Elena woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, everything felt normal, familiar. She walked into the kitchen expecting the usual Julian at the counter, 2 cups already poured. He was there. But there was only 1 cup. He slid it toward her as she approached. I already had mine, he said. Elena paused. It was a small thing. Insignificant even. But something about it felt off. Thanks, she said, taking the cup. Julian nodded, wiping his hands with a towel. I've got an early meeting, he added. I might be late tonight. Oh, Elena replied. Okay. He grabbed his keys. No lingering, no extra glance. Just a quiet exit. The door closed behind him with a soft click. And for the first time, Elena felt it. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to create a subtle, unfamiliar discomfort. Something was shifting. Not just in her, in him. But instead of examining it, she reached for her phone. Another message from Marcus. Another moment of attention. Another confirmation that somewhere else she was still being chosen. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to believe that was what mattered most. By the time Elena admitted to herself that something had changed, she had already decided it wasn't wrong. That was the part she didn't say out loud. Not to Julian, not to Marcus. Only to herself in quiet, carefully constructed thoughts that felt more like clarity than justification. It started with language, not actions. She stopped thinking of it as interest. Started calling it connection. Stopped seeing it as distraction. Reframed it as alignment. And once the words changed, everything else followed. Marcus didn't chase her. He didn't need to. He simply remained present in a way that made absence feel like loss. Their conversations became routine, not scheduled, but expected. A message in the morning, a comment in the afternoon, a late-night exchange that lingered just long enough to blur the line between professional and personal. It was gradual, careful, controlled, and because of that, it felt real. You ever feel like you built a life that technically works, but doesn't actually fit? Marcus asked one evening, his voice low through the phone. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, Julian in the next room. Yes, she answered before she could filter it. A pause. Then Marcus said softer, That's not failure, you know. Elena frowned slightly. What is it then? Awareness. The word settled into her like something she had been waiting to hear. Awareness. Not betrayal, not dissatisfaction, not restlessness, just awareness. You're allowed to outgrow things. Marcus continued. Even people. Elena's breath caught just slightly, because the thought had been there, unformed, unspoken. And now it had a voice, a structure, a permission. I'm not saying that's what this is, he added, measured. I'm just saying, sometimes we stay because it's comfortable, not because it's right. Elena looked toward the bedroom door, closed. Julian was inside, likely reading or working or existing in that quiet, self-contained way that had once felt grounding. Now it felt distant, static. I don't think it's that simple, she said. It never is, Marcus replied. But that doesn't mean it's not true. The first time she met Marcus alone, she didn't call it a date. She told herself it was just easier to talk outside of crowded rooms. More honest, more direct. They met at a quiet bar in Tribeca, dim lighting, low music, the kind of place where conversations weren't meant to be overheard. Marcus was already there when she arrived. Of course he was. He stood as she approached, his expression shifting not dramatically but enough to register something personal. Not performance, recognition. You came, he said. Elena gave a small smile. You sound surprised. I don't get surprised often. Maybe that's your problem. Or maybe it's why I noticed you. The line hovered between flirtation and something else, something more intentional. Elena sat across from him, placing her bag beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. And in that silence, she felt it again. Not the absence she felt with Julian, but a different kind of tension, expectation. So Marcus said, leaning back slightly, Are you going to tell me the truth tonight? Elena raised an eyebrow. About what? About why you're really here. She exhaled softly, because she knew what the right answer was. Professional curiosity, networking, innocent conversation. But none of those felt accurate. I wanted to see if this felt the same outside of everything else, she said finally. Marcus held her gaze. And Elena didn't answer immediately, because the truth was already there. It did. More than the same. It felt clearer, sharper, more defined. Yes, she admitted. Marcus nodded once as if confirming something he had already known. Good. Back home hours later, Elena moved quietly through the apartment. Julian was asleep. The soft rise and fall of his breathing filled the room. She stood there for a moment watching him. This man, who had never lied to her, never betrayed her, never made her question his loyalty. And yet something inside her no longer reached for him the same way. Not because he had changed, but because she had. And instead of confronting that truth as something painful, she reshaped it into something necessary. I'm being honest with myself. The thought came easily now. Too easily. I'm not settling. I'm choosing what feels right. She slipped into bed beside him, careful not to wake him. For a moment she lay still, staring into the dark. Then her phone buzzed softly in her hand. Marcus tonight felt real. Her chest tightened. Not with guilt, with recognition. She typed back before she could think too much. Elena. It was. A pause. Then, Marcus. We should stop if it isn't. Her breath caught. Not because she believed he would walk away, but because of what the question implied. A line, a choice, one she could still step back from. Elena stared at the screen. Then slowly, Elena, I don't want to stop. The message sent. And just like that, the boundary wasn't blurred anymore. It was crossed. Julian woke briefly sometime later. Not fully. Just enough to notice the faint glow of Elena's phone illuminating her face in the dark. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched quiet still as her expression softened into something he hadn't seen directed at him in a long time. Then she turned the screen off, and the room returned to darkness. Julian closed his eyes again, not because he didn't understand what he had just seen, but because he did. And somewhere deep beneath the surface, a decision began to form. Not yet spoken, not yet acted on, but inevitable. In the days that followed, Elena stopped thinking of it as a betrayal. That word didn't fit anymore. It was too crude, too simple for something that felt this complex, this layered, this right. Instead, she called it something else: a transition, a realization, a necessary shift towards something more aligned with who she truly was. And in that reframing, Julian became something else too. Not the man she loved, but the life she had outgrown. She didn't realize it yet, but the moment she needed to rename the truth was the moment she lost the ability to recognize it. The conversation didn't begin with anger. It began with a kind of quiet that felt prepared. Elena stood in the living room, her coat still on her bag, resting against her hip, like she hadn't fully decided whether she was arriving or leaving. Julian was by the window, not looking at her, just standing there, one hand resting lightly against the frame, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the glass. The city stretched out below them, unchanged, indifferent. "I think we should talk." Her voice was steady, carefully measured. Julian didn't turn right away. Okay, just that. No tension, no anticipation. And for a second, Elena felt something shift, something she couldn't quite name. She had expected resistance, or at least emotion, but there was none. "I'm not happy," she said. The words came out cleaner than they felt. Julian nodded once, still facing the window. "I know." That stopped her. "You, No," now he turned. Slowly. His expression wasn't hardened, wasn't wounded in any visible way. It was calm, too calm. "I've known for a while," he said. Elena felt a flicker of something, discomfort maybe, or the faint realization that she wasn't as in control of this moment as she thought. "Then, why didn't you say anything?" Julian held her gaze. Would it have changed anything? The question landed without force. But it didn't need to, because Elena didn't have an answer. Not an honest one. "I think I need something different," she said instead. There it was. The version of truth she had rehearsed. The one that felt justifiable. Not cruel, not selfish, just necessary. Julian didn't interrupt, didn't challenge it. He simply listened. "I've been trying to understand it," she continued, her voice tightening just slightly. "And I think I've changed. What I want, what I need, it's not the same anymore." Julian nodded again, as if each word was confirming something he had already accepted. "And there's someone else." The sentence hung in the air, heavy, final. Elena watched him closely now, waiting for something, a reaction, a crack. But Julian just breathed, slowly, evenly. "How long?" he asked. The question was direct, unavoidable. Elena hesitated. "Not long," she said. "It's not about that." Julian's eyes stayed on hers. "Then what is it about?" She swallowed. "It's about how I feel when I'm with him." There it was. The truth stripped down to its core. Julian looked at her for a long moment. Not searching, not doubting, just seeing. "And how do you feel?" he asked. Elena exhaled, almost relieved to say it out loud. "Seen, chosen, alive." The words came easier now, because she believed them, fully. Julian nodded once more, as if filing the answer away. Okay, that was it. No argument, no attempt to counter it, no reminder of everything they had built. Eleanor's chest tightened unexpectedly. "You're not going to say anything else?" Julian tilted his head slightly. "Like what?" "I don't know anything," she said, a hint of frustration slipping through. "You're just Accepting this, he considered that. Then quietly, you've already made your decision. The clarity in his voice unsettled her, because it removed any illusion that this was still open ended. I thought you'd fight for us, she said. The moment the words left her mouth, she wasn't sure if she meant them. Julian's expression shifted just slightly. Not pain, not anger, something closer to understanding. I don't think that's what you want, he said. Elena frowned. How do you know? Because if you did, Julian replied, you wouldn't be standing here telling me about someone else. The room went still. Elena felt the weight of that settle into her chest. Not as accusation, but as something harder to push against. Truth. I'm not trying to hurt you, she said, softer now. I know. Then why does it feel like you don't care? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Julian looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since the conversation began. And in that gaze, there was something she hadn't seen before. Not detachment, not indifference. Something deeper, final. I do care, he said. A pause. Then, but I'm not going to ask someone to stay where they don't want to be. The words landed quietly. But they closed something. Elena felt it. That subtle, irreversible shift. As if a door had just locked behind her and she hadn't realized she was stepping through it. So that's it, she asked. Julian exhaled slowly. I think it has been for a while. Silence filled the space between them. Thick, unavoidable. Elena's grip tightened slightly on her bag. She had imagined this moment differently. More resistance, more emotion. Something that would confirm the weight of her decision. Instead, there was just acceptance. And somehow that made everything feel heavier. I'm going to stay with him, she said finally. The words felt sharper now. More real. Julian nodded. Okay, no hesitation. No second question. Just acknowledgement. Elena waited. One last time. For something to pull her back. A reason to doubt. A reason to pause. But Julian didn't move. Didn't reach for her. Didn't ask her to reconsider. And in that absence, her decision solidified. Then I guess, this is goodbye? Julian held her gaze. For a moment longer than necessary. Take care of yourself, Elena. Not don't go. Not stay. Just that. And somehow that hurt more than anything else he could have said. She nodded, turning toward the door. Her hand hesitated on the handle. Just for a second. Then she opened it. And stepped out. The door closed behind her with a soft final click. Julian stood there for a long moment after she left. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Not strained, not uncertain, just empty. He walked slowly through the apartment, not searching for anything, just moving, taking in the space as it was, as it would be. He stopped by the dining table where the blueprints still lay, unfinished, like something interrupted but not worth returning to. Julian gathered them quietly, stacking the pages with precise care. Then he set them aside. Not with frustration, not with regret, just closure. Across the room, Elena's absence lingered. Not in objects, but in the spaces between them. And for a brief moment, just one something passed through him. Not doubt, not second-guessing. Grief, clean, contained, real. He let it exist, didn't push it away, didn't hold on to it, just acknowledged it, then it was gone. Outside, Elena stepped into the night air. The city was still alive, bright, restless, full of movement. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. Marcus? Are you okay? She looked back at the building, at the life she had just walked away from. And for a fleeting second, something inside her hesitated. Not enough to turn back, just enough to feel. Then she typed, Elena, I'm on my way. She hit send and kept walking. Neither of them said it out loud, but that moment, that quiet, unresisted departure closed something that would never open again. Not because it ended loudly, but because it ended without a fight. And some endings, once accepted, don't leave anything behind to return to. At first, it felt exactly like Elena had imagined. Effortless, intentional, alive. Marcus didn't just include her in his life, he placed her in it. The dinners were curated, the conversations sharp, the attention deliberate. He introduced her to people who mattered, said her name like it carried weight, like it belonged in rooms she used to feel she had to earn her way into. You have a presence, people remember, he told her once, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back as they stood in a gallery in Chelsea. It wasn't just the compliment. It was the way he said it, like a statement, not an opinion. And for a while, that was enough. More than enough. Elena moved into his apartment within 3 months. It happened naturally, or at least that's how it felt at the time. Her things slowly replaced empty spaces. Her routines blended into his. Her reflection began to exist in mirrors that hadn't held her before. She told herself it was alignment. Progress. Proof that she had chosen correctly. The first crack wasn't loud. It came disguised as preference. I think that dress works better for smaller dinners, Marcus said one evening, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. Elena paused, her hand resting on the fabric. What's wrong with it? Nothing, he replied smoothly. It's just not the impression I'd go for tonight. He didn't say you shouldn't wear it. He didn't need to. Elena hesitated, then nodded slightly. Okay. She changed. It didn't feel like control. Not then. It felt like refinement, guidance. Marcus knew these spaces better than she did. He was helping her belong. The second crack came in silence. At a dinner with investors, Elena found herself mid-sentence explaining a campaign strategy she had led. Marcus interrupted smoothly, seamlessly. What Elena means is, he began reframing her words into something sharper, more concise. The table nodded. Impressed, Elena smiled, played along. But something inside her shifted. Not enough to name, just enough to notice. You're overthinking it, Marcus said later that night when she brought it up. I just felt like you cut me off. I clarified. He corrected, pouring himself a drink. There's a difference. Elena leaned against the counter watching him. I didn't need clarification. Marcus turned to her, his expression calm, controlled. It wasn't about need. It was about impact. The word landed differently than she expected. Impact. Not respect, not partnership, just outcome. You want to be effective in those rooms, don't you? He added. Elena hesitated. Because of course she did. Marcus softened his tone slightly, stepping closer. I'm on your side, Elena. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm helping you become the version of yourself that belongs there. The version, not you. She didn't realize why that distinction mattered yet. Only that it lingered. Weeks turned into months. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Elena began to notice a pattern. Marcus's attention was precise, but conditional. When she aligned with him, his pace, his tone, his expectations, he was present. Engaged, focused. But when she didn't, he withdrew. Not dramatically, not in ways that could be easily called out. Just enough. A delayed response. A shorter conversation. A shift in energy that made her feel like she had stepped slightly out of frame. You've been distant, she said, one evening, echoing words she had once used with Julian. Marcus didn't look up from his phone. Have I? Yes. A pause. Then he set the phone down, his gaze meeting hers. I've been busy. That's not the same thing. Marcus studied her for a moment. Then not everything needs to be analyzed, Elena. The words were calm, measured, but they carried a subtle dismissal, a closing of the conversation before it could fully open. And suddenly, she remembered. Julian had never done that. He had left space. Marcus controlled it. The realization didn't hit all at once. It unfolded, piece by piece, moment by moment. Until one night, standing alone in Marcus's apartment while he worked late again, Elena found herself scrolling through her phone, not looking for anything, just filling the silence. And then she saw it. An old photo. Her and Julian. Nothing special. Just a candid shot her. Laughing, his gaze soft fixed on her in a way that felt unguarded, unmeasured, real. Elena stared at it longer than she meant to, trying to remember what that felt like. Not the stability, not the quiet, but the absence of performance. The absence of needing to be adjusted. Her chest tightened. Because for the first time, a thought surfaced that didn't align with the story she had built. What if I didn't outgrow it? What if I misunderstood it? The idea unsettled her deeply because it didn't just question Marcus, it questioned her, her judgment, her certainty. Everything she had justified to get here. The final crack came without warning. At another event, another room full of curated attention, Elena stood beside Marcus as he spoke with a woman she hadn't met before. Confident, polished, familiar, too familiar. "This is Laila," Marcus said casually when Elena approached. "We've worked together." Laila smiled, warm, composed. "It's nice to finally meet you." Finally. The word slipped in quietly. But it stayed. Elena nodded, returning the smile. But something in her chest tightened. Not jealousy, recognition. The way Marcus's attention shifted. Subtle, but precise. The same way it had once shifted toward her. Later that night, Elena stood in front of the mirror. The same mirror where she had once adjusted herself to fit into Marcus's world. Now she looked at her reflection and felt something unfamiliar. Not invisibility, not irrelevance. Something else. Replaceability. And suddenly everything rearranged itself. The attention, the intensity, the way he had made her feel chosen. It wasn't unique. It was a pattern, a system, and she had mistaken it for something personal, something real. Marcus walked in behind her, loosening his tie. "You left early," he noted. Elena didn't turn. "I was tired." A pause. Then he stepped closer, his reflection appearing beside hers. "You've been off lately?" The words were neutral, observational. But they landed like a quiet accusation. Elena met his gaze in the mirror. "Have I, Marcus, studied her?" Then nodded slightly. "Yeah." Silence stretched between them. And for the first time, Elena didn't rush to fill it. Didn't adjust. Didn't explain. Because something inside her had already begun to collapse. Not loudly, not visibly, but completely. She wasn't the exception, she was the iteration. And the moment she understood that, the entire foundation of what she had chosen stopped feeling like freedom and started feeling like a mistake. Regret didn't arrive as a single moment. It didn't crash into Elena's life with clarity or force. It settled, slowly, quietly, like dust accumulating in corners she had stopped looking at. Years passed, not dramatically, but with a steady erosion that was harder to resist than any sudden collapse. The relationship with Marcus didn't end in betrayal, it ended in indifference. No arguments, no final confrontation, just a gradual withdrawal, his attention thinning, his presence becoming optional, then unnecessary. By the time he left, it almost felt expected. "I think we want different things," he said, standing near the door, already halfway gone. Elena nodded. Not because she agreed, but because she understood the pattern now, and this time she wasn't surprised. Her career followed a similar trajectory. At first, Marcus's influence had opened doors. Introductions, opportunities, access. But over time, those connections proved to be exactly what they were, extensions of him, not of her. When he stepped back, so did the room. Projects became less frequent. Her name carried less weight. And slowly, without any clear turning point, Elena found herself outside the circles she once moved through so effortlessly. "You've been quieter lately," a former colleague remarked during a chance encounter. Elena smiled politely. "Just focusing on different things." It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the truth either. The truth was, she no longer knew where she fit. Her apartment was smaller now, quieter. Not by design, but by necessity. The city outside still moved at the same relentless pace, but inside time felt stretched, empty in places it used to be full. One evening, Elena sat by the window, a glass of wine untouched beside her. Her phone rested in her lap. No notifications, no messages waiting, just a blank screen reflecting back a version of herself she barely recognized. It wasn't loneliness. Not exactly. It was something heavier. A kind of emotional exhaustion that came from carrying questions without answers. And lately, one question had started to repeat itself. Not loudly, but persistently. When did I get it wrong? She didn't think about Julian the way she used to. Not as a comparison, not as something she had outgrown, but as something she had misunderstood. At first, the memories came in fragments. Small, almost insignificant moments. The way he made coffee before she woke up, the way he listened not to respond but to understand, the way silence between them had never demanded performance. Back then, she had called it lack. Now she saw it differently. It wasn't absence. It was presence without pressure. And she hadn't known how to value that. Elena found an old email one night while clearing out her inbox. A message from Julian. Years ago, no subject line, just a single paragraph. I don't think love is something you prove in big moments. I think it's what stays consistent when nothing is happening. She stared at it longer than she meant to, because at the time she had barely registered it. It had felt simple, almost underwhelming. Now it felt like something else entirely. Something she hadn't been equipped to understand when it mattered. Regret, she realized, wasn't about wanting him back. Not exactly. It was about understanding him too late. About finally seeing the value in something she had dismissed, after she had already lost access to it. And the worst part wasn't the loss itself, it was the permanence of it. There was no version of this where she could go back. No conversation that would undo what had already been decided. No explanation that would make her choice less final. She tried once, not to fix anything, just to reach out. Her fingers hovered over his name for a long time before she typed. Elena, I was thinking about you today. I hope you're doing well. She read it over, deleted it, rewrote it, simplified it. Finally, she sent it. The message sat there. Delivered. No response. Minutes passed. Then hours. Then days. Julian didn't reply. Not out of cruelty. Not out of avoidance. But because for him that chapter had already closed. That was when it truly settled in. Not as a realization, but as a condition. This wasn't something that would pass. It wasn't a feeling that would fade with time. It would stay, resurface, repeat itself in quiet moments, in empty spaces, in the absence of something she could no longer define without him. Elena leaned back against the couch, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. And for the first time, she allowed herself to see it clearly. Not the version of the story she had told herself. Not the justification. Not the reframing. Just the truth. She hadn't chosen something better. She had chosen something louder. And in doing so, she had walked away from something deeper. Something real. Something rare. Tears didn't come immediately. When they did, they weren't dramatic. Just quiet, steady, unavoidable. Because regret, she realized, wasn't about the moment you lose something. It was about all the moments after, when you finally understand what it was worth. Outside, the city kept moving. Unchanged. Indifferent. But inside, Elena sat with the one thing she couldn't outrun. Not Marcus. Not her career. Not the life she had built and lost. But the simple, irreversible truth she had been loved in a way she didn't recognize. And by the time she learned how to see it, there was no one left to receive it from. Elena didn't plan the moment. She told herself it was coincidence. That running into Julian again, after all these years, was just the city folding in on itself the way it sometimes did. But deep down, she knew she had been orbiting this possibility for months. The gallery in Midtown wasn't the kind of place she used to attend anymore. Too curated. Too precise. too reminiscent of a life she no longer belonged to. And yet, when she saw his name listed among the featured collaborators for a new architectural exhibit, she went. Not for closure. That's what she told herself, just to see. Julian stood near the center of the room speaking with a small group. He hadn't changed in the ways she expected. No dramatic transformation, no visible reinvention. But something about him felt different, grounded in a way that didn't seek attention, composed in a way that didn't invite interruption. He didn't dominate the space. The space adjusted around him. Elena watched from a distance longer than she meant to, trying to reconcile the man she remembered with the one standing in front of her now. He looked lighter, not because life had been easier, but because he was no longer carrying something he used to, her. When their eyes finally met, there was no shock, no hesitation, just recognition. Julian excused himself from the group with a quiet nod and walked toward her. Each step measured, unhurried. Elena. Her name sounded the same, and completely different. Hi, she said softly. For a moment, they just stood there. The noise of the room faded into something distant. I didn't know you'd be here, she added. Julian glanced briefly at the exhibit behind him. I'm part of the project. Of course he was. That made sense. Everything about him now made sense in ways it hadn't before. It's impressive, she said. Thank you. A pause, then silence. Not the kind they used to share. This one was defined, boundaried. Elena felt it immediately, and it unsettled her more than she expected. How have you been? She asked. Julian considered the question. Good. Just one word. But this time it felt complete. Not dismissive, not distant, just sufficient. I'm glad, she said, her voice tightening slightly. Another pause. She hadn't planned what to say next. Hadn't expected the space between them to feel this final. I reached out once she said the words slipping out before she could stop them. I know. Elena blinked. You saw it? Julian nodded. I did. Why didn't you respond? The question came sharper than she intended. Not accusatory, but raw, honest. Julian held her gaze, not avoiding, not softening. I didn't think it would be helpful. The answer was simple, but it landed with weight. Helpful for who, she asked quietly. For either of us. Elena swallowed. Because she understood what he meant. And that understanding hurt more than rejection would have. I wasn't trying to disrupt anything she said. I just wanted to know if I was still there. He didn't say it harshly. He didn't need to. Elena looked down briefly, then back up. Yes? The honesty surprised even her. Julian nodded slowly. And now you know. The words closed something. Not dramatically. Not with force. Just decisively. Elena felt it settle into her chest. This wasn't a conversation that could expand. It was one that was already ending. I've thought about you, she said, her voice softer now. Julian didn't react, not visibly. I didn't understand what I had. She continued, not then. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Not hope, not pain, recognition. I know, he said. That was all. No validation, no invitation to continue. Just acknowledgement, and I'm sorry. The words hung there. Heavy, earnest, late. Julian nodded once. I believe you. Elena's chest tightened. Not because he doubted her, but because he didn't need her apology. It didn't change anything. Didn't shift the ground beneath them. I thought, maybe we could talk, she said carefully. Not to go back, just to understand. She nodded. Julian exhaled slowly. Then, for the first time, his gaze softened not with emotion, but with clarity. I think you already do. The simplicity of it struck her, because he was right. There was nothing left to explain. No hidden perspective, no missing piece. She understood. Completely. And that understanding came with something else. Finality. I used to think you didn't fight for us, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian tilted his head slightly. And now she hesitated. Now I think you just saw the truth before I did. A small pause. Then Julian nodded. That's probably fair. Elena let out a quiet breath. Because that was it. That was the answer she had been circling for years. Not dramatic, not complicated. Just true. Across the room, someone called Julian's name. He glanced briefly in that direction, then back at her. I should get back? Of course he should. He had a life, a place, a direction that didn't include her. Elena nodded. Of course. Another pause. Shorter this time. Lighter. Because there was nothing left holding it open. It was good to see you, Elena. The words were polite, sincere, and completely detached from anything deeper. You too, she said. Julian gave a small nod. Then he turned and walked away. Elena stood there watching him disappear back into the room, back into a life that had moved forward without her. There was no dramatic ending, no final look, no hesitation in his steps, just continuation. And for the first time, she felt the full weight of what that meant. He hadn't been waiting. He hadn't been holding on to anything. He had let go, completely. The room felt louder now. Or maybe she just had nothing left to anchor her in it. Elena turned slowly, moving toward the exit without fully registering the steps. Outside, the night air hit her like something real, unfiltered, unavoidable. She stopped on the sidewalk, her breath catching slightly. Not from shock, not from heartbreak, but from something deeper. Recognition. This was it. Not the loss, not the mistake, but the permanence of it. Julian hadn't taken anything from her. He had simply accepted her decision. And in doing so, he had removed himself from a future she now understood she wanted. Too late. Elena looked back once, through the glass. She could still see him inside, laughing lightly at something someone said, engaged, present, whole, untouched by the version of her that still existed in the past. And in that moment, she finally understood the true reversal. She had once been the one who walked away, certain, chosen, in control. Now she was the one standing outside, looking in, realizing that what she had left behind was never going to open its doors to her again. The regret didn't surge. It didn't overwhelm. It settled, quiet, permanent. A presence she would carry not as punishment, but as truth. A truth she would revisit in small moments, in silence, in the absence of something she could no longer reclaim. Elena turned and walked into the night. No destination, no urgency, just movement. Because stopping meant feeling it fully. And she already knew it wasn't something that would fade. Some endings don't echo. They don't ask for closure. They don't offer resolution. They simply remain as the moment you finally understand everything. After you've lost the one thing that mattered most.